The mayor's asked for federal guarantees for New York City bonds and notes and, if necessary, emergency loans. The first answer from the Ford administration was a loud, firm no.
President Jimmy Carter, with then-Mayor Abe Beame at his side, pledged to rebuild.
But we need more money, Carter.
Ronald Reagan, the South Bronx, August 1980.
I'm trying to tell you, I can't do a damn thing for you if I don't get elected.
15 years, a horrible fiscal crisis, and too many broken promises. As a result of the neglect from the New York City and federal government during the 1970s, fires devastated the South Bronx, leaving it for dead. However, from the ashes of this horrific tragedy rose the triumphs of the new cultural and artistic hip-hop movement, which brought hope to the enduring communities of this borough and shaped the world as we know it today.
Broken glass everywhere, people pissing on the stage, you know they just don't care. I can't take the smell, can't take the noise, got no money to move out, I guess I got no...
The 1970s is considered a dark age for New York City, which suffered from a serious budget crisis. This fiscal crisis originated from increased spending and decreased profit coming in through taxes. This devastated the New York City economy, causing a rise in taxes, the loss of jobs, and increased crime rates, prostitution, and deindustrialization. Factories fell apart, businesses failed, and rents fluctuated. The people of the urban poor and middle class resorted to gangs and crimes as a result of their anger and frustration. Not only was New York City suffering from economic distress, but it was also going through drastic demographic and financial changes. The government took on major building projects despite its poor economy. In one project in particular, urban planner Robert Moses tore out the heart of the South Bronx as he constructed the Cross Bronx Expressway. Such urban projects demolished houses and businesses, causing whites, Jews, and Italians to migrate out of the city, while new immigrant groups, such as Latinos and African Americans, began flowing into the Bronx. This migration phenomenon was known as white flight. Over the course of the 1970s, more than 1/3 of the white population in the Bronx moved out. From this mass shift in demographics, the New York City government decided that it was best to cut budgets to the whole city, which led to the concept of planned shrinkage.
New York City was undergoing economic distress, didn't have the resources it once had to serve all its citizens, so it should concentrate in those neighborhoods which had a chance of being saved, and neglect those neighborhoods which had reached an advanced stage of decay.
Soon after planned shrinkage was implemented, the number of police officers dropped by around 6,000 and the number of firefighters by around 2,500 in the Bronx. The goal of this plan to cut budgets intended to facilitate the economic recovery of New York City. However, this plan only agitated landowners and urged them to turn to arson.
Because the property values were starting to decrease and they couldn't earn money on the rents that they wanted, would burn the buildings and just take the insurance money and abandon the property.
Such property abandonment and lack of government aid worsened living conditions for the residents of the Bronx and increased the risk of fire. Most of the apartment buildings in the Bronx were old and dilapidated with outdated wiring, which was a serious fire hazard that landlords refused to replace. These apartment buildings began to overcrowd with large families, especially after the creation of the Cross Bronx Expressway. As a result of the deteriorating living conditions in the South Bronx, conventional fires became extremely frequent.
Fires happened so regularly that when they came up our fire escape, my mother used to offer them coffee. Because it just happened so much.
Unfortunately, these fires were not dealt with very well by the government.
At that time, the city, one of the things they were doing was cutting funding. A lot of that came out in the course of in cutting fire department houses. They had these models and these theories that they could close certain fire companies and open ones in other areas, and that it would be so much more efficient that you could actually do more with less budget. And the long story short is that they mess up the models, and they end up closing all these fire companies that they thought would not have a major impact on coverage, but in fact were extremely important companies, extremely busy companies.
Due to these poorly handled small conventional fires, which were later uncontrollable, the Bronx was decimated. The fires devoured the Bronx, which lost more than 97% of its buildings in this fire epidemic. The majority of the enduring residents of the borough were left with nothing. For many, their homes, their possessions, and their loved ones had been swept up by the fires. However, the one thing that these residents did not lose in the fires was their hope for the future. From this hope came the birth of hip-hop. This musical phenomenon all began in a small apartment in 1520 Sedgwick Avenue in the Bronx, when then 18-year-old Clive Campbell, now known as DJ Kool Herc, helped his sister host a back-to-school party.
DJ Kool Herc said, instead of mixing whole records, let me take a really hardcore percussion section of one record and fuse it into the percussion section of another record and give the dancers like 5-6 minutes of pure percussion.
This kind of music was new and different. No one had heard of something like this before. Surprisingly enough, people liked this music, and thus, hip-hop was born.
Hip-hop as a whole, as a culture, is all of these elements together. The element of DJing, the element of rap, the element of the graffiti element, and the dance element as well. All these elements together make hip-hop.
As hip-hop became more prominent in New York City, hip-hop music started to expand and evolve into three different components. The DJ, who was in charge of the music, the MC, who was in charge of keeping the crowd hyped through rapping, and the b-boy, who was in charge of entertaining the audience with breakdancing. Hip-hop also began influencing other areas of life in New York City. It had a profound impact on fashion as vibrant bomber jackets and flashy golden chain necklaces came into style. Colorful graffiti art spray-painted on the walls of abandoned buildings and the sides of subway trains became a common sight. It soon became evident that hip-hop was transforming all of New York City, and for the better. Before long, hip-hop was no longer recognized as simply an art form. It had become an essential part of New York City's distinctive culture.
The message I think hip-hop was conveying was about a party.
When everybody's written us off, we can find joy, we can find community.
Though it first started with a message for a party, hip-hop soon became a new way that the generation, especially young teenagers, living in the aftermath of the fires, could express themselves and draw attention to the injustices and horrible living conditions in the Bronx from the fire epidemic. For example, a rap song titled The Message by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five describes daily life for residents in the Bronx and delivers disturbing yet powerful imagery to its audience.
Broken glass everywhere. People pissing on the stage, you know they just don't care. I can't take the smell, can't take the noise. Got no money to move out, I guess I got no choice.
Each line illustrates the terrible conditions of the South Bronx in the aftermath of the fires. Its residents were faced with dirty, smelly apartments infested with vermin in noisy neighborhoods where acts of violence and drug crimes were frequent. The song mentions that though teens wanted to better themselves and overcome these struggles, they were barred from doing so by poverty. Hip-hop songs drew public attention to the devastation of the South Bronx and the lack of federal assistance. These songs also emphasized the need for peace, love, and unity within the fire-swept neighborhoods of the Bronx. Several circumstances that resulted from the aftermath of the fires played a key role in nurturing the rise and spread of hip-hop. One major event that was critical to hip-hop's development was the Blackout of 1977, whose effects were greatly influenced by the Bronx fires, which caused limited access to utility resources. Although it led to the largest mass arrests recorded in the city, teens were able to steal turntables, sound systems, records, and speakers that they previously did not have access to make their hip-hop music. In addition to the blackout, planned shrinkage and budget cuts from the fires resulted in reduced staff in federal departments like the police department.
There weren't necessarily the police around to stop kids from going to the parks and hooking up power from street lamps.
Without the tragedy of the fires that resulted in the destruction of entire neighborhoods, it is likely that hip-hop would not have developed into the global phenomenon that it is today.
It's an amazing story. People written off like as hopeless were creating a music that would change the world. It's kind of cool.
Hip-hop has shaped not just New York City, but also the world that we know. Without hip-hop, our world would be a lot less colorful, a lot less vibrant, a lot less creative, and a lot less culturally enriched than it is today.